Section 22 of 12 Stories of Lancelot Biggs by Nelson Bond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Cyndajm. Mr. Biggs Goes to Town. Part 1. When Lancelot Biggs started in the soap-making business on this asteroid, he got strange results. One thing is certain. When bigger and better shirts are made, the officials of the corporation which underpays us will stuff 'em. We were squatting in a cradle on Earth waiting for flight orders when the control turret door swung open and in marched two owl-eyed zombies dressed in frowns and white mess jackets. One of these looked at us, then at a slip of paper. He said, "Donovan? Herbert J?" "Present," I said, "but not accountable for. Otherwise known as Sparks. What's the matter, Saturn?" "Who found out what about me?" "Come," ordered the stranger curtly, "with me." And he jerked a thumb in the general direction of the doorway. Cap Hansen, he's the skipper of our space shuttling freighter, the Saturn, bridled like a mick at an orangeman's ball. If there's one thing he cannot tolerate, it's hearing anyone else issue orders on his bridge. His brows congealed into fur-lined cumulus clouds. "And what," he demanded, "is the meaning of this, if I may ask, gentlemen?" The other white-clad studied him briefly. "Hansen?" he queried. "Captain Wadimir V?" "That's my name, sir. And why?" "Come with me," said the second specter, and diddled his digits like my accoster. I said, "Not so fast, kiddies. Last time I followed a flickering flange, I ended up in an alley behind a Martian joy joint with a head full of ache and a wallet full of nothing. In words of one syllable, what's this all about?" My answer came not from the pair before us, but from the entrance behind them. Through this came two figures. The foremost was that of my longtime friend and shipmate, Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs. Behind him was his uncle, Prendergast, first vice president of the IPC. It was the older Biggs who spoke. "It's all right, Sparks. These men are acting under company orders. They are medical officers assigned to give a physical examination to every man aboard the Saturn." "Every man?" choked Cap Hansen. "Did you say every man, sir?" I knew what he was thinking, and I felt a swift pang of compassion for the old boy. Hansen was one of the finest skippers who ever paced a quarterdeck. He had forgotten more space lore than most men ever learned, but he wasn't as young as he used to be, not by about 50-odd years. Although Cap looked hale and hearty, his joints were beginning to stiffen like a mud pie on Mercury, and sometimes, if you stood beside him in a quiet room, you could hear the dim clank and clatter of his arteries hardening. A physical examination might mean the end to his long career. Exile from active service to the waffle-tailed job he had long dreaded. But old PB, who, being an Earth lover, didn't know what grounding means to a true spaceman, just smiled. "That's right, Captain. Every member of the commanding crew is being examined. You see, the company is removing the Saturn from the freighter service." "Removing?" Well, that was jolt number 2. Words got as far as my tonsils and clogged there, but Biggs's uncle continued blandly. "And because of its magnificent service record on behalf of the corporation, your ship is being assigned to new duties. Henceforth, the Saturn will lift grabs only on special tasks, assignments of vital importance which have proven too difficult for ordinary vessels of the fleet." Well, that was something like. At last, our efforts, or should I say, the wacky-pot genius of Lancelot Biggs, had earned us recognition. My waistcoat buttons tugged at their moorings, and I glanced at my comrades. I saw they shared my pride. Cap Hansen's huge grin threatened to slice off the top of his head, while Lancelot Biggs's sensitive Adam's apple was galloping up and down his throat like a runaway yo-yo. "Well now, said Hansen, gratified. That being the case, I can quite understand why physical exams are necessary, sir. But do you feel that everyone? Everyone, nodded the vice president. From highest to lowest, everyone aboard this ship. Yes, Captain Hansen, those orders have been issued and cannot be altered. Biggs gurgled happily. Tell him what our first assignment is, Uncle Prinny. Ah, yes, of course, Lancelot. Captain Hansen, you are doubtless cognizant of the, delicate situation on the planetoid Iris? Delicate? I snorted. Of course Cap knew about it. We all did. It was the top-ranking scandal of the decade. A group of privateers seeking a base from which to pursue their nefarious exploits had established themselves upon innocent, helpless little Iris. There, though it was plain to everyone that the diminutive rodent-like Irisians were being actually held in peonage, the corsairs had set up a puppet government, thereby procuring territorial rights against which the Interplanetary Council could not file demur. So, delicate, I snorted. That situation smells worse than pole pussy perfume in a telephone booth. What the Space Patrol ought to do is go in there and grab those rascals. Sparks! Frowned the old man. That will do. But he turned questioning eyes to his superior. Why doesn't the Space Patrol do something about it, sir? Because, pointed out Uncle Prinny, the privateers are, speaking from a purely legal standpoint, quite within their rights. The patrol cannot move against them because to do so would be to violate the standards of freedom upon which the Interplanetary Union is founded. But everybody knows they're crooks, pirates. True, but by glancing back over the pages of man's history, you will learn that it is always the crooks who twist law to serve their own evil purposes. Those privateers moved to Iris, became citizens of that planetoid, then by brute force they seized control of the political machine, voted themselves into governing power. With such power, it was an easy matter to pass laws forbidding exercise of Space Patrol rights of search and apprehension, extradition, prohibiting further immigration of peoples from civilized planets. I said, hey, wait a minute. There's one thing they can't do. According to interplanetary law, no government can forbid the right of free trade, barter, and exchange. Lancelot's uncle smiled. Absolutely right, Sparks, he agreed. And that is where we come in. A deadly silence followed his pronouncement. Then the air began sizzling with a hot frying sound. That was Hansen preparing to blow a verbal fuse. He exploded like a retread on a hot day. So, he roared, so that's the kind of company I've been working for all these years? Well, Vice President, here's my rocket. He tore his precious spaceman's emblem from his breast and hurled it to the floor. And here's my brevet. He ripped the golden epaulets from his coat and heaved them after the rocket. And the hell with you and the IPC, sir. Any outfit which would be so stinking niggardly as to trade with a crew of scoundrels like that. Lance Biggs said mildly, Now, Dad, don't be hasty. After all, the old man stared at his first mate and son-in-law sadly. You too, Lancelot. I'm disappointed in you, my boy. I never thought you'd fall in line with... Biggs's uncle said, You are a very impetuous person, Captain Hansen, if you will let me continue. I don't want to hear no more, growled Hansen. Go away and leave me alone. But let Uncle Prinny tell you, Dad, pleaded Biggs. The hell with... He can tell me, I broke in. And if there's not a quick change of theme, I'm going to do a little snoop poking before I leave with the skipper. Go ahead, Mr. Biggs. You are two very impetuous men, decided Pendergrast Biggs, and I am surprised that you would think your employers would... But never mind. Let me assure you that we have no intention of dealing with these criminals on a friendly basis. On the contrary, we are going to do our utmost to break their grip on the suffering citizens of Iris. As Sparks has already commented, there is one thing the usurpers of Iris cannot legally do. That is, forbid the right of free trade and commerce between other planets and the captive Irisians. On the other hand, they can forbid the establishment of any community, outpost, or permanent trading station upon their planetoid. They can prevent unwanted outsiders from becoming citizens of their base. In short, strangers may visit Iris, but they cannot stay there. Then why? Began the old man. However, continued the vice president, there is a loophole they have overlooked. That is the clause in the interplanetary law which reads, any person or group of persons who discover, create, or otherwise develop a hitherto undeveloped industry dependent upon the natural resources of any planet in the system are granted the privilege of establishing settlement upon that body for a period not to exceed 35 solar years. He smiled at us. That, gentlemen, is the entering wedge with which we plan to crack the defenses of these tyrants who hold Iris in their grip. I stared at him confusedly. I don't get it, sir. You mean we're going into some kind of business on Iris? Precisely, Sparks. But what? Iris is just a bleak little hunk of rock swinging in the asteroid belt. It doesn't have any soil to grow things in, any bodies of water to fish in. It doesn't have any natural resources we can develop. So what excuse are we going to offer for barging into Iris? We need no excuse for barging in, Sparks, pointed out Lancelot Biggs soberly. It is our right and privilege to do so. All we need to do is claim we mean to develop a new natural industry, and by space law they are forced to admit us for a 10-day investigatory period. If by the end of that time we have proven our right to remain, they must let us do so. And we, being on Iris, can then call upon the Space Patrol to protect our property. The patrol can move in and wipe out the pirates. Sure, snorted Cap Hansen. Sure, that all sounds swell. But in 10 measly days, what new industry are we going to develop on Iris? Like Spark says, they ain't no natural resources. Oh, that, smiled Biggs's Uncle Pendergrast. Why, that's already been arranged. We're going to make soap. Soap? Gasped Cap Hansen. Soap, I bleated. Pardon me all to hell, sir, but somebody's crazy. Soap isn't a natural resource. It doesn't grow on trees or come up out of mines. You make it out of oils and fats and... We're not thinking that kind of soap, Sparks. I mean the form of hard soap used by miners, grease monkeys, and other manual laborers. Soap made out of pumice stone. Our geological reports indicate that Iris, being composed mainly of igneous rock formations, is rich in pumice. All we have to do is locate an area rich in this material, start mining operations, and bingo! We have Stetchner and his crew of rascals right where we want them. And that, lads and lassies, was jolt number 3. I knew about the Iris situation, but this was the first time I'd ever heard the name of its kingpin and instigator. Hearing it, I winced. Stetchner? Otto Stetchner, the cunningest, meanest, toughest, unhanged scoundrel who ever shoved a baby through an airlock? He was our antagonist? I moaned feebly and pawed at my sagging jowls. Examine me quick, buddy, I begged the waiting doctor, while my blood pressure is 0-. Something tells me I don't want to go along on this expedition. Stetchner? Lance Biggs stared at me curiously. Why, don't tell me you're afraid, Sparks. It's not that. It's just that I'm allergic to soap." "Nonsense," pooh-poohed his uncle. "Why, cleanliness is next to godliness, Donovan." "That's what the rule book says," I conceded, "but in this case, cleanliness is next to insanity. Lead on, Sawbones, and here's hoping my veins are positively acrawl with something terrible." But no such luck. As it turned out, we didn't wait for the results of the medical examination to be tabulated before we lifted grabs. Something, I wouldn't know what, upset the routine, with the result that we took off that night for Iris. If you ask me, I think it was Cap Hansen's doing. I think he was afraid he might not pass the physical, and he wanted to be sure of being on the bridge for at least one more trip on the Saturn. So we lifted grabs, and with Lance Biggs at the studs, set course and trash for little Iris. A mere hop, skip, and jump from Earth since we were using the VI unit. For the first time in a long while, Diane Biggs didn't make the shuttle with us. Biggs's wife, the old man's daughter, wasn't feeling up to par. Neither was I, but they didn't give me any rain check. Anyhow, in just a little longer time than it takes to digest a day's victuals, we were hovering in the strato a mile or so above the capital city of Iris, identifying ourselves to the port authorities on the ground below. "Who are you?" demanded the Iris dispatcher, "and what do you want here?" "IPC Freighter Saturn," I tapped back, "requesting privilege to land under Space Code Regulation 14, Paragraph 4. May we come in?" "Just a minute," advised my contact. He cleared, and we waited breathlessly. When he came back again, it was on the tele-audio rather than via the bug. The visor screen brightened, and we were looking into the scowling pan of none other than the big boss himself, Otto Stechner. "Well?" he demanded. Cap Hansen took over. He said boldly, "What seems to be the trouble, sir? We made a simple request for permission to land. We're an exploring expedition attempting to set up a new industry under Space Code "I know all about that," growled Stechner. "Well, you're wasting your time, Captain. Iris has no natural resources and wants no colonists. You better try somewhere else." Cap said stolidly, "My company's instructions." "Your company be damned," roared Stechner, his neck thickening darkly. "I control Iris, and I want no busybodies interfering with my—" Biggs moved forward to the visor plate, and when I say moved, I mean exactly that. Even his best friend could never honestly describe his peculiar means of locomotion as walking. His lanky frame lurches along in a cross between a gallop and a trot, sort of a bow-legged pig in a mirror maze motion. He coughed embarrassedly, and his liquescent larynx performed incredible involutions. He said, "This is most distressing, Governor Stechner. Of course, you realize that if we are not permitted to effect a landing, we will be obliged to report the matter to our employers, and they in turn will naturally report it to the Space Patrol." Well, that did it. Stechner was playing a cautious, tricky game, trying to get by within the barest shadow of the law. In order to bar the Space Patrol from his domain, he had to live up to certain interplanetary regulations which forbade their marching in on him. His eyes flashed dangerously, but he gave in. "Very well, gentlemen, you may land, but remember, you have only 10 days in which to prove there are natural resources upon Iris which you can develop commercially. If in that length of time you have not succeeded, you must leave." "We understand that," said Biggs. "Thank you, sir." And so, unwanted guests of a most unwilling host, we laid the Saturn down in the lair of an acknowledged band of space pirates. It was a piece of daring which, had I had time to consider it, would have given me more goose pimples than a Siberian fan dancer. But as it happened, I was too busy to bother about it. For as Biggs was maneuvering the Saturn to its cradle, my bug started chattering. It was Joe Marlowe calling from Lunar 3. What he had to say was plenty. "Is that you, Donovan?" he tap-tapped. "Greetings, pal. They ache today?" What, I shot back, are you talking about? Your feet, of course. We just got the reports from the medical examiners. They say your tootsies are as flat as a pair of toe flounders. That makes you the same at both ends, doesn't it? I stiffened. Stop wasting juice, I advised him, and give out. You got the reports? What do they say? Is the old man? Sturdy, rattled Marlowe, is the word for Hansen. Your skipper's as chipper as a kipper. You're OQ, Todd's OQ. Bronson and McCurdy and Anderson are OQ. The crew checks 100%. Enderby needs 2 teeth filled. Otherwise, OQ. Blaster Jacobs needs sunlamp vitamin C, but otherwise OQ. As a matter of fact, one name was conspicuous by its absence. My gizzard turned over slowly. I interrupted. Marlowe, look back over your list. Didn't you forget somebody? How about... The answer came back slowly, almost sympathetically. Even over dit-da-dits, you can read expression in talented fingers. Marlowe tapped. I'm sorry, Donovan. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but there is one unfavorable report. The examiners have declared one man aboard Saturn to be absolutely unfit for space travel. His heart is so bad that it may give out at any minute. That man is First Officer Biggs. End of section 22. Section 23 of 12 Stories of Lancelot Biggs by Nelson Bond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Cyndajm. Mr. Biggs Goes to Town, Part 2. Well, there you are. Somehow, I managed to take down the conclusion of the memo and sign off. But all the while I was doing so, my brain was churning with the doleful tidings I had received. The thought kept repeating over and over again. Biggs, grounded. Lancelot Biggs, unfit for space travel. My memory flashed back to the day when, almost 3 years ago, that tow-headed youngster had first gangled aboard the Saturn, fresh out of the academy and not yet dry behind the ears. 4th mate he'd been then, with no more responsibility than a laundress in a nudist camp. The old man had not liked him, partly because he was eccentric, mostly because he had avowed his intention of placing a gold band around the 3rd finger left hand of the charmer whose name was at that time Diane Hansen. But somehow Lance had overcome these handicaps, by persistence worked himself up to the position of first officer, by wit and guile and intelligence come through every obstacle set before him, by sheer determination proven to the skipper that he would make a good son-in-law. His inventive genius had given mankind the velocity intensifier unit, the uranium speech trap, the first safe way of descending to the planet Jupiter. Oh, why go on? Biggs's discoveries are as prominent as his Adam's apple in his neck, and that's plenty outstanding. But now, his future assured, his erratic past behind him, Biggs is to be exiled from the space he loved? Biggs, grounded? Lancelot Biggs, unfit for space travel? So coursed my gloomy thoughts as I sat there in the silence of my radio turret. I did not even notice the Saturn was easing into the cradle. My first intimation that we were on Iris came with the arrival of Cap Hansen. He came burbling into my cubby, happy as a bee in a honeysuckle vine. "OQ, Sparks, we done it. We're on Iris. Shoot a message to Earth that we..." "Hey, what's the matter? Sick?" Without a word, I handed him my transcript of the report. He scanned it swiftly. "Ah, the medical report, eh? Glory be, Sparks, this is wonderful. I passed. Isn't that swell? And you passed. And Todd, and..." Then he stopped as abruptly as I had. A cloud swept across his forehead, leaving his eyes darkened and somber. In a whisper, he said, "Lancelot?" I said, "That's the end of the chapter, Skipper. For 3 years, the Saturn has been the finest ship in the fleet. We done more tough jobs and had more fun than any bunch of spacemen who ever lifted gravs under the same emblem. But it ends now. When Lance Biggs leaves this ship, nothing will be the same ever again." "His heart?" faltered the old man. "Who would have believed there was anything wrong with his heart? I know he's skinny and all that, but he always seemed healthy enough." "Where's he now?" "What? Oh, outside. He's trying to make a purchase of some real estate, Sparks. It don't matter much just where he buys, so long as he buys. The whole asteroid's honeycombed with pumice pockets, you see. All we got to do is buy up some land, start digging, produce hard soap, and earn the right to remain here. But his heart, Sparks? I can't believe." "Hush!" I warned him. "If those sounds aren't a herd of antelopes on roller skates, I think that's him coming now." Cap Hansen crumbled the flimsy, jammed it deep into his pocket. "Not a word about this, Sparks, not yet. We've got to break it gently." I nodded just as Biggs, grinned from ear to ear and back again, lurched into the turret. On his right arm, he was carrying a queer-looking little squeegee. At first, I thought it was a teddy bear. Then it moved, and I realized I was in the presence of a native Irisian. He, or it, was a curious little squirrel-like creature with big goggling eyes, a huge bushy tail, and enormous whiskers. Biggs chirped cheerfully. "Here's one of the local boys, folks. Sparks, you speak Irisian, don't you? Well," he paused, glancing at each of us questioningly. "What's the matter? You two look as if you lost your best friend." Cap Hansen essayed a laugh. It sounded like an echo from a torture chamber. "Nothing at all, son. He's just discussing the difficulties of the problem ahead of us. That's all." "So that's an Irisian, huh? Can you talk to it, Sparks?" He looked at me with new respect. I smiled. "If my academy prof wasn't just fooling," I told him, "I can." I turned to the little rodent, twisted my lips into a series of purring whistles, which meant greetings. "Fwee, turtle, turtle, whoop," replied the Irisian. Cap Hansen looked at the asterite disconsolately. "He's oiling, doesn't he, Sparks?" "Not a bit. That's his native tongue." He said, "How do you do?" "Yeah, well, it didn't sound like it to me," Biggs suggested. "Ask him, Sparks. Ask him where we can buy or lease some property on Iris." So I did, and the answer was encouraging. It seemed the little fella chwee flipple twee, meaning he owned some property a few miles outside the capital city, and he'd be glad to sell us this patch of ground for chirp fertile foo. I translated. Cap Hansen turned crimson with rage. 4,000 Earth credits for a hunk of ground you could cover with a handkerchief? Ridiculous. We won't pay any such price. "It's no skin off our nose, Skipper," I reminded him. "The corporation's paying for it." Hansen nodded slowly. "Well, maybe you got something there. We can't do no digging for soap without something to dig in. OQ, go ahead and make the deal, Sparks." "And I," chimed Biggs, "will organize the minute and get to work on the digging." "No," said Hansen hastily. "You mustn't exert yourself like that, boy. Remember your—" He stopped abruptly. Lancelot glanced at him. "What? Remember my what, Dad?" "Nothing. You stay here and direct the men. I'll get 'em onto the job." So we became possessors of a bit of Iris terrain and set forth on the adventure which, we hoped, was to bring an end to Otto Stechner's rule over the tiny planetoid. Of course, you know that Iris is only a little hunk of cosmic debris about 300 miles in diameter, busting along in the planetoid belt, just one of myriad specks which are all that remain of what was once upon a time a planet like Earth in the space sector between Mars and Jupiter. It has no atmosphere of its own, so when you leave the domed cities and villages, you have to wear your bulger. And since its gravitational attraction is about as strong as a 2-day-old kitten, you have to wear clinch plates in your sandals. But our boys are a tough crew, accustomed to working under even worse conditions than these, and I'm not bragging too much when I say that in 2 shakes of a rocket's tail, we had staked out our property and buckled down to our task. Our task was, of course, just plain digging. From that grayish-looking topsoil, we had to peel away the crumbling layers which would lead us to the basaltic depths beneath. From this substratum, we must extract a quantity of the pumice which was to justify our presence here. A simple thing. Only it didn't turn out that way. It took us 3 days to scrape off the detritus layer. Then we reached rock. But it wasn't exactly the sort of rock we'd expected to find. Obsidian or basalt, lava flow. It was sandstone. Gray shale. Lancelot Biggs looked at the samples of this rock and shook his head. He said, that's funny. Sandstone is not an igneous formation, you know. I don't know nothing, said the old man, except we ain't got too much time to spare. Let's get on with the job. So we kept digging. We had to use automotors. The rock layer was tougher than blue plate steak, but slowly our blaster chunked its way through to a layer of slate. Cap Hansen said worriedly, "You reckon they might have made a mistake back on Earth, Lance boy? This here's roofing material don't look like what we were supposed to find. Maybe there's pumice underneath, but..." "Frankly," I said, "I doubt it. Pumice is the result of air bubbles mixing with uncooled lava mixture. Slate is a sedimentary deposit. I think we've stumbled across a punk piece of ground myself. We'd better go buy another hunk of property, eh, Biggs?" Lancelot Biggs said soberly, "If we want to locate pumice, I'm afraid so. I've been reading up on geological structure, and all of the evidence indicates that..." "Go see what you can do then, Sparks," ordered the old man. "You're the only one of us who could talk Irisian. See if you can buy a nice soap mine somewhere." So I went, and I got nowhere fast. The Irisian from whom we had bought this piece of property was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared. No other native of the tiny planet would even listen to my pleas. The moment I started talking shop, they covered their fuzzy ears with furry claws and scuttled away. Things began to make sense. In this maze of mystery, I detected the fine touch of Otto Stechner. So I sought him in the armed citadel he called his gubernatorial White House. I put the question to him bluntly, which does not necessarily mean boldly, because to tell the truth, my knees were shaking like a bowl of unchilled jello when I marched into his guarded study. "Land?" repeated Stechner. "Land, Mr. Donovan. I'm afraid there is no property for sale on Iris. You see, everything here is owned by the government. Private individuals cannot buy or sell land." I said, "But only 5 days ago we bought a piece of property from an Irisian named Twisirl. At the time he mentioned he had other properties for sale, but now I cannot seem to find him." "Twisirl?" "Twisirl. Oh, yes," said the governor thoughtfully. "Twisirl. I remember now. An unfortunate incident. So careless of Twisirl. He was killed in an accident a few days ago, just the day before the Irisian government passed the new law forbidding the further sale of private properties. You know." "In other words," I said, "your bunch of thugs did him in. Is that it, Stechner?" Stechner said silkily, "You do us an injustice, Mr. Donovan. We who control the government of Iris operate within the law at all times. That is why we find no need of allowing the space patrol within our sphere. Now, if you will excuse me, I am very busy." "In short," I said, "you don't intend to let us buy any more land, is that it?" "In short," replied Stechner, dropping his pretenses for the moment and giving me a stare which would have curdled a bottle of cream, "no. You've been given every legal opportunity, Mr. Donovan. You have been here on Iris exactly 5 1/2 solar constant days. If, within 10 days after your arrival, you have not demonstrated your ability to produce a commercial commodity heretofore undeveloped on this planet, you will be asked to leave." I rose. "OQ, Stechner," I told him grimly. "You hold the chips now, but let me tell you this. If we do find what we're looking for and gain the right to remain on Iris, our first move will be to call in the Space Patrol to protect our property. And you know what that means. It means the end of you and your gang. The end of your use of Iris as a base for marauding expeditions. You know that, Stechner. That's why you're..." Stechner's face modeled unhealthily. He said in a gray voice, "You are talking dangerously, Donovan. Be careful no accident stops your wagging tongue. If anything happens to me," I promised him, "you'll receive a visit from the Space Patrol before you can stutter nebular hypothesis. Stechner, that's been arranged." His lips were a white slit through which he gritted, "I quite understand, Donovan, but don't underestimate Otto Stechner. Even for that eventuality, I am prepared. Now, get out." "Moreover," I began. "I said get out." So, I concluded my story to the skipper and Lance Biggs. I scrammed across the bridge and over the lake and up to the camp here, and thus endeth my little attempt to buy more land. It just can't be done, boys and girls. It's a dead duck. The old man frowned. He said, "Yeah, there's no use squawking about it. Stechner holds the whip hand. The worst of it is, he'll probably be able to kick us off Iris without doing a thing to bring in the patrol. I mean, we'll get the gate strictly legal because we still ain't found no sign of pumice, and we're pretty deep now. Well, Lancelot?" Biggs had been thinking. You can always tell when he's thinking because his feet shuttle from side to side like spectators' heads at a tennis match. Now he said, "Across the what? And over the what, Sparks?" "Serialized," I told him, "bridge and lake. So, what's that got to do with the present situation?" "The problem before the board is..." "I was just wondering," commented Biggs, "how there should be a lake on the planetoid Iris, and why? As we know, there are no natural bodies of water on this tiny orb. Therefore, they must be artificial." "All right," growled the skipper, "so they're phony. Maybe Stechner's got a sense of beauty." "Sure," I agreed. "What he likes best is a lovely dagger, attractively decorated with nice fresh blood. Cap's right, Biggs. We're not here to marvel at the scenic wonders of Iris. We've got a job to do, and we're getting nowhere fast." "You mean," said Biggs, "our excavations?" "I've been thinking about that too, and it is beginning to make sense to me. You know my motto, Sparks, get the theory first. I think I've solved the theory now. The only thing which still remains is to put it into practice, but that lake..." "You've solved it, Lance, son?" broke in the old man eagerly. Fine. I knew you wouldn't let us down. So what do we do?" "Well, we must ask McMurdy to rig up a hydraulic drill, first of all. Then we must..." "Drill? To dig pumice? Son, you must be..." Big shifted embarrassedly. "Well, it was only an idea, sir. Of course, if you'd rather, we can delve into the matter of the lake." "Never mind," said the old man hastily. "The drill it is. Anything to get your mind off that damn lagoon. OQ. Issue the orders, Sparks." So that was how we started boring instead of digging into the soil of Iris. And of course, the shift of operations consumed still more of our ever-dwindling allotment of time. It took McMurdy and his black gang a full day to rig up the hydraulic drill and another day to set the cast so it would ram true. The next day, we spent watching the diamond head romp up and down in its casing, interrupting the steady chug-chug every once in a while, so Lancelot Biggs, who was watching the operation with the care and feverish attention of a mama duck, could study the bore facing. He wiped his hand around the friction-heated facing and studied the granules. I craned over his shoulder and got a glimpse. I moaned, "No go, Lance. That still isn't pumice. I'm afraid Stechner wins. We've only got a little over 1 day to go, and it's no soap, hard or soft." But there was no discouragement in the eyes of Biggs. Instead, he was muttering with a sort of satisfaction. Just as I thought, first shale, then slate, then this diatomaceous conglomerate. It is phenomenal, but it must be so. Sparks! He turned to me suddenly. Call Earth! Tell the authorities to dispatch fighting units of the Space Patrol immediately to protect our property. Hurry! There's no time to waste, and warn them to be very careful in approaching this planetoid. They must make no attempt to land until we signal them the way is clear. Understand? Of course, I stammered. You mean to think Stetchner will pit up a scrap rather than let them in? But are you sure you know what you're doing, Lance? After all, a handful of grit. Biggs laughed triumphantly. But what grit, Sparks? What grit? See those bits of whitish-colored substance? I looked again more closely at the powdery substance in the palm of his hand and said, Rock measles? Fossils, Sparks. Fossils? But what have fossils got to do with... I can't tell you now. There's too much to be done. I got to go down, for one thing, and have a look at that artificial lake beside the governor's mansion. Cap Hansen, who'd been off supervising the boring operations, came up behind him just in time to overhear these final words. He asked, Still talking about that lake, Lancelot? What for? Why do you have to go down there and snoop around? Because, explained Biggs, I've been worrying about it, and I've just decided why it was built. Well? Biggs said slowly, Stetchner's a pirate, right? Doubled and redoubled, I conceded, in spades, so what? We know he has a fleet of swift space cruisers, no? Yes. Well then, where are those cruisers? I gulped and stared at him. So did Hansen. Then the two of us shook our heads and said together, I don't know. Neither do I, admitted Biggs grimly, for certain. But logic tells me it can only be one place, hidden from view beneath the waters of that artificial lake, concealed, poised for deadly striking upon any unwary attacker. End of section 23. Section 24 of 12 Stories of Lancelot Biggs by Nelson Bond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Cyndajm. Mr. Biggs Goes to Town. Part 3. And there's an example of typical Biggsian reasoning. It had never occurred to either of us to wonder at the absence of a space fleet we should have known must be somewhere around. But the moment Biggs hurled his bombshell, we knew he must be right. It was the only explanation which satisfies the mystery of the lake on Lakeless Iris. Stetchner moored his spacecraft underwater to hide them from the view of potentially hostile visitors. From their aqueous vantage point, they could emerge in the split of a second, guns spewing lethal flames to smash down the patrol if and when the patrol ever moved to capture Stetchner's stronghold. I yelped, Great swooping serpents, let me get to my bug! And started for the ship's radio, but Biggs grabbed my shoulder. Not so fast, Sparks! Don't send any warning about the lake in your message, not even in company code. Stetchner is a clever man. His experts might discover we knew their secret, and that would be just too bad for us. We'd upset their apple cart, yes, but we wouldn't be alive to enjoy the fruits of our victory. And, he grinned wryly, oddly enough, I have an ardent desire to keep on living. It was the suddenness of his words which trapped the old man. He nodded and said reassuringly, Of course, my boy, and you will. Why, these days a bum ticker doesn't mean anything. Lots of men have him and perk right along. Then he stopped, crimsoning as he realized what he'd said. Biggs stared at him open-mouthed, then turned to me. I avoided his eyes. I couldn't help it. Biggs said, "Bum ticker, Dad?" Hansen said miserably, "I'm sorry, boy. I meant to break it gentler than that, but it sort of slipped out." "You mean," said Biggs dazedly, "I didn't pass the physical examination? It showed my heart was bad?" I nodded. "That's right, Lance." But it can't be. I feel perfect. His eyes darkened with a new fear. "I'll be grounded," he cried. Hansen said, "I'm sorry, son, but you'll still work for the corporation, of course, and you'll have lots of time at home with Diane, and it's even better than batting around in space." But he wasn't kidding a soul, least of all Lancelot Biggs, who, for a moment, turned his back to us. When he again faced us, there was a curious moisture in his eyes, which, considering the fact that in the rarefied atmosphere of Iris we were all wearing lightweight bulgers, could not have come from blowing dust. He said in a low voice, "Well, get that message off, Sparks. I'll run on along about my errand, for if I'm not very much mistaken, we'll have visitors within the next few hours as soon as Stetcher's radio men break down your code." And he disappeared toward the city. A lean and lanky, somehow strangely forlorn-looking Biggs. Well, I sent the message. It cleared through Johnny Holmes at Long Island Spaceport, and Holmes was so excited he almost busted a finger on the key as he chattered back at me. "No foolin', Donovan? You succeeded in locating pumice?" "We've succeeded in locating," I told him, "something. Don't ask me what. I'm only the hired help around here. But Biggs says it's OQ, and whatever he says is all right with me. So goose the Rocketeers and get them on their way here as soon as possible, if not sooner." "Right," snapped Holmes. "Consider them started." So that was that. I wandered back to the digs. There waited for the second part of Biggs's prophecy to be fulfilled. It didn't take long. About 4 hours later, Earth Standard, of course, you can't figure hours on a tiny planetoid which has no axial revolution, a monocar came blistering from the capital city to our encampment. It was packed to the gunwales, mostly with armed guards and Stetcher. Stetcher was packed to the gunwales, too, mostly with fury. He hurled himself from the speedster and strode to Hansen's side. "Captain Hansen, may I ask the meaning of this?" He jammed a sheet of paper under the old man's nose. On it was typed a complete, interpreted transcription of the message I had recently sent to Earth. The skipper took it, studied it slowly, coolly. He said, "Same to you, Governor Stetcher. May I ask how you got a copy of a message which was sent in private code?" "That," blustered the Politico, "is neither here nor there. My men are experts at deciphering such messages. What I demand to know is, by what right have you summoned a force of space patrolmen to my planet?" The old man didn't know. He was as much in the dark as a blindfolded mole in a blackout. But he bluffed it through. "Why," he said calmly, "under Regulation 19, Section 17 of the Space Code, of course, to protect our property." "Property?" roared Stetcher. "What property? Don't try to pretend to me, sir, that you have succeeded in finding pumice on this terrain." I broke in. "So, you even knew what we were searching for, eh, Stetcher?" "Naturally. I'd leave nothing to chance, gentlemen, nothing. Before your ship left Earth, I had been advised as to the trick by means of which you intended to gain a foothold on this asteroid, and care was taken that the property you were allowed to purchase at a handsome price, for which I thank you, gentlemen, held no basaltic deposits." "Well, Captain, answer me. Have you or have you not unearthed any pumice deposits?" The answer came from a few rods away. Biggs had returned from his exploring trip. Now he took over, a fact for which the skipper was obviously grateful. "The answer, Governor Stetcher, is no, we have not." "Ah, then by what right, Lieutenant, did you summon the patrol to Iris? You realize that you were given but 10 days to locate and develop a heretofore undeveloped industry upon Iris, and by your own admission, you have failed to find that for which you came. True, admitted Biggs easily. Quite true, Stetchner. But though we have failed to find pumice, we have found something else. Another commodity never before exploited on Iris, and thereby earned the right to stay here for 35 years and to call in the patrol to protect our rights. Stetchner's fingers worked convulsively. Another product, sir? Out of this bleak, worthless soil? Impossible. And Biggs shook his head. Incredible, sir, but not impossible, because you see, it exists. Unless my latest estimates are completely in error, our drill should strike, at any minute now, a pocket of that substance which was created when Iris was still a part of a mighty planet swinging in an orbit between Mars and Jupiter, a commodity of great value, an essential fuel. What? Roared Stetchner. What are you talking about, you blithering idiot? Biggs didn't answer him. He didn't have to. For at that moment there rose such a warning shout from where our workers tended the diamond-headed drill. Voices raised in swift alarm. From the ground beneath our feet came a strange, roaring, rushing, gushing sound, and even as the workmen fled, the superstructure of our drill shattered and flew high in the thin air of Iris, borne aloft on a pillar of thick black goo. And oil, cried Lancelot Biggs triumphantly. Oil, Stetchner, that is the new industry which grants us the right to remain here. Well, it was a victory, all right. But for a minute I thought it was going to be a victory with flowers. For Otto Stetchner's mouth turned livid with rage as he realized he had lost his tight grip on the planetoid Iris. His hand leapt to his belt, and for the space of a held breath I felt certain he would ray us all down in our tracks. It was the oil which saved us. Pluming skyward, its jet hit a half-mile ceiling. Then, because Iris is not entirely airless and has a slight gravitation, the column umbrellaed and splashed earthward. A viscous rain began to splatter all around and over us, a greasy black torrent which turned us all into tar babies before we could duck for shelter. Stetchner gasped, choked, and raced toward his monocar. But as his cohorts piled into it with him, he roared back at us, "This isn't goodbye, gentlemen. I have other and more important things to take care of right now. But when I have disposed of the Space Patrol fleet, then I will return to take care of you." Out of range of the oily deluge, Cap Hansen turned a serious face to Biggs. Disposed of the Space Patrol? What does he mean? Biggs replied soberly, "I'm afraid he means just what he said, sir. My guess about the lake was right. It is the hiding place of his fleet. Stetchner will flee there now, man his ships, and lie in wait for the patrol. When the fleet arrives..." I said, "Well then, golly, let's lift the Saturn out of here, beat it out into space, and stop the fleet." But Biggs shook his head. "No, I have a better plan than that." "Oh, Chief," he called to Chief Engineer McMurdy, who, dripping with fuel oil and pride, was hobbling back toward the ship for a change of clothing. "Nice work on that drill. Tell the men to cap the well for the time being. Did you get those metal poles I asked you for?" "Yes, sir." "Good. And the silver?" "About 3 tons of it, sir." "Silver?" broke in Hansen. 3 tons of it? Why, you must be talking about that special shipment in the ADEC bins. You can't touch that, Lancelot. It ain't ours to use. It belongs to..." "It belongs to humanity," declared Biggs. "No price is too high to pay for the overthrow of Stetchner's crew." He glanced at his wrist chrono. "What time did you wire the patrol, Sparks?" 11:03 AM. They should arrive in less than 6 hours. We must get to work. All right, Chief, you know where I want those materials, and don't forget the salt. No, sir. Salt? Moaned Hansen. My God, what now? You ain't gonna cook and eat, Stechner? Lancelot Biggs smiled tightly. No, not entirely. All I'm going to cook is his goose. What happened in those next few hours makes sense to me now, but it didn't while it was going on. I'll admit that without a tremor, but then few ordinary mortals do understand what L. Biggs is driving at until he pops up at the end of his endeavors with a QED clenched in his molars. All I knew was that by the time our gang got from the camp down to the capital city, Stechner and his crowd had disappeared. The city was empty save for a few assorted thousand fuzzy Irisians scampering around, whimpering dolefully because they didn't know what was going on. Otto and his mobile units had taken a run-out powder, but as Biggs had hunched it, they hadn't gone far, just into their spaceships, which lay a few yards below the placid surface of the artificial lake beside the governor's mansion. Under Biggs's direction, McMurdy's men got going. Their first move was to dump a holdful of ordinary table salt, residue of a cargo we'd never completely discharged, into the lake. That was screwy enough, and drew a murmur from the old man. His murmur changed to a moan when they followed this move by dumping into the lake those bins of silver ore which Biggs had mentioned. Then came the wackiest part of all. Biggs implanted one of the two metal uprights McMurdy had forged for him into the southernmost extremity of the lake. Then, with the help of a tractor crew, of course, those things were 20 feet long, he set its mate at the other end of the lake, connected wires from the post to the hypotomic motors of our ship. All this took time, naturally. A lot of time. Maybe too much time? Because he had scarcely finished these preparations when there came a message from the commandant of the SP flagship. Ahoy, Iris, SP cruiser, Pollux approaching. Clear cradles for official landing. Our physical labor completed, we were back in my radio turret now. As we picked up this omniwave call, Biggs spun to me excitedly. Sparks, contact Stechner immediately. I twisted the dials, finally succeeded in picking up the wavelength the submerged Irisian governor's set. Biggs spoke clearly over the audio. Governor Stechner, this is Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs aboard the Saturn. Can you hear me? Stechner's reply shot back savagely. I can, Lieutenant. Have patience. I will take care of you when this other little matter has been attended to. I called to warn you, said Biggs expressionlessly, that you are in gravest peril. I am offering you a chance to surrender peaceably. Will you do so? Stechner's answer isn't printable. It was a blunt refusal. Biggs sighed. Very well, Governor. Then let me issue this final warning. Do not attempt to live grabs from your present location, and do not attempt to use your ordnance. To do so will be to court instant and terrible death. Why, you, sputtered back Stechner's retort. But Biggs had turned from the radio, pressed a stud, activating the hypnos of our ship. A dull growl surged about us as the powerful motors stirred into action. I stared at him questioningly. What are you trying to do, Lance? Scare Stechner into surrendering? No, Sparks. I meant every word I said. Look at the lake. I flashed on the visilens, swung it to cover outside, and what I saw there broke a gasp from my lips. The surface of the lake was alive with tiny frothy bubbles. The whole lake was seething with motion. Cap Hansen cried, Sweet saint! Now I understand. You've turned that lake into a stew kettle. You're going to boil him alive. No, I contradicted. It can't be that. The ships are insulated against the absolute zero of space. Heat and cold mean nothing to them. Electricity. You must be electrocuting them, Biggs? You're half right, acknowledged my lanky friend. Not electrocuting, though. He never finished his sentence, for at that moment there came to us over the still-connected audio the voice of Governor Otto Stetchner issuing a command to his men. "Fleet, prepare for action. Set studs, battle formations, set to lift grabs." "No!" cried Biggs. "Don't, Stetchner. It will mean death to you all." "Ready?" rasped the stern voice. "Follow me. Lift!" There sounded the rising tumult of mighty motors thundering into action. Then, "The fools!" cried Lancelot Biggs pityingly. "The poor, doomed fools! Why wouldn't they believe me?" And as my eyes swiveled to the visiplate once more, just in time to see the last act of the little drama, it came with terrible suddenness, devastating completeness. The waters of the churning lake boiled fiercely for a fraction of an instant as a half-dozen spaceships jetted simultaneously. Then, from the inwards of the lake, as from a gigantic steam bomb, burst a violent sheet of flame, a coruscating, eye-blinding moment of brilliance, then another and another, 6 all told, then silence, quietude, and the sad voice of Mr. Biggs saying, "Cut the connection, Chief McMurdy. Our task is ended." I got it then. I'm slow, but eventually I always straighten things out. I stared at Biggs with a sort of horrible fascination. I said, "So that's it. You didn't try to harm them. You simply electroplated their ships." "That's it, Sparks," acknowledged Biggs sadly. "And when they attempted to jet from the lake, their blasts backfired against the silver barricading deposits over their ports. Their ships exploded like living bombs." Later, as our workmen reversed the polarity of Biggs's gigantic electroplating apparatus to reclaim as much as possible of the silver used in the operation, the commander of the Space Patrol Fleet stopped by to offer his congratulations. "It was a magnificent job, gentlemen," he said. "We commend you on having helped the system in ridding itself of one of its few remaining pest holes. Henceforth, the Irisians will govern themselves in freedom and contentment. Meanwhile, if your corporation wishes to maintain its property rights on Iris, we shall, of course, honor your discovery of fuel oil." He paused, staring at Biggs. "But how did you know there was fuel oil on Iris, Mr. Biggs? Other geologists had never detected its presence." Biggs flushed. "I didn't know," he confessed. "As a matter of fact, I suspect that little oil well will run itself dry in less than 2 days. You see, it can be but a tiny pocket at most. The asteroid is mostly composed of igneous rock formations. My guess is that it comprised the side of a volcanic mountain on the planet of which it was once, ages ago, a part. When the planet exploded, a minute portion of the mountain valley was torn away with this fragment. It was from this ancient peat bog the oil derived. I began to guess there might be a vestige of oil when we dug up black slate. That is the invariable residue of submersion. Then, when we found the fossiliferous rocks, I knew we were on the right track. It was just luck." "Well, luck or not," said the space officer heartily, "you certainly grasped every advantage which came your way. We need spacemen like you, Biggs." And there it was again. For the first time in many hours, another reminder of the fate overhanging Biggs. Space needed men like Biggs, but by virtue of a medical examination, he had been declared unfit for space travel. The old man's face clouded, and he said slowly, "There's another delicate problem. If Lance can't stand space travel, what are we going to do? Take him home or leave him here on Iris?" Biggs said resignedly, "You better call Earth and find out, Sparks." So I contacted HQ, and when I had asked my question, there was a moment of silence. Then the bug pounder on the other end of the connection said, "Do with Biggs? What do you want to do with him, Donovan?" "Why, bring him home, of course." I said, "But if his heart won't stand the trip." "Heart? Heart? What's matter with Biggs's heart?" "Why, the medico reported Oh, that, pooh-poohed the Earth operator. That was a mistake, didn't I tell you? The examiners got mixed up. It seems their orders were to examine every single man aboard the Saturn with no exceptions. And since there were 2 Biggses on board... Biggs, who'd been listening to the message come in, jerked like a spitballed schoonmarm. Uncle Prenny, he yelled. They got him mixed up with me. I'm the first mate and he's the first vice president. They probably just entered the report that the first officer was unfit for space travel. Uncle Prenny's heart's been bad for 30 years. I grunted contentedly and cut the connection. Then all's well, I said, that ends swell, huh? The old man, too, grinned happily. Right you are, Sparks. From now on, our troubles are over. Peace and contentment from now on. But with Biggs aboard the Saturn, that's 1,000 to 1 shot. Any bets? End of section 24. Section 25 of 12 Stories of Lancelot Biggs by Nelson Bond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Cyndajm. The Ordeal of Lancelot Biggs, Part 1. In spite of peace pacts, Earth ships were being attacked on Themis. Could Biggs answer that one? Well, like it says in the old adage, things equal to the same thing gather no moss. When the corporation that underpays us snatched the Saturn off the freight shuttle and turned it into a troubleshooter for special assignments, we thought we were getting a break. We were. Break is just another word for bust. The result of our alleged promotion was that for a fractional increase in salary, we worked twice as hard at jobs 10 times nastier than any we'd ever tackled before. Like, for instance, the night Cap Hansen and I'm Bert Donovan, bug pounder of the Saturn, were at the home of Lieutenant and Mrs. Lancelot Biggs. Biggs is, of course, the first mate of our void-mangling jalopy. A year ago, he married the skipper's daughter, Diane. We were sitting around chatting about this and that and the other inconsequential truffle, trying to look calmer than we actually felt, when the telephone jangled. Bet it's a wrong number, I said, and picked it up. I was right. It was a wrong number named Cheverly, assignment clerk at Long Island Spaceport. He said, "Solution, Sparks, is Captain Hansen there?" "Present," I said, "but not accountable for." "Listen, Dracula, how about calling back tomorrow or next month?" He snapped. "This is official business, Donovan. Put him on before I report you." So I handed the receiver to the old man, and for the next few minutes, Diane and Lance and I eavesdropped upon one of those unintelligible half-conversations between Hansen and the drip on the other end of the wire. "Yeah," said the old man. "Yeah, this is Hansen." "Eh? Eh, what's that?" "But Cheverly, What? But I'm on furlough, man. The staff and the crew of the Saturn were granted 3-week Oh, I see. Emergency, eh? Well, if we have to. But can't you find some other ship too?" I understand. Yes, very well. I'll get in touch with my men immediately." He hung up and turned to us gravely. I think we all knew what he was going to say before he said it. Diane cried, "Oh, no, Daddy, no, not now." And Biggs asked, "What is it, sir? I hope they don't want us to." Hansen fumed. "They do. Ding bust 'em to Hades. It's an emergency mission. We're to lift Graves immediately." "Lift Graves?" exclaimed Biggs bleakly. His lump of a larynx leapt like a lemon in his scrawny neck. "But, Dad, I can't go now." His jaw sagged to his wishbone, making him homelier than usual, and brother, that's saying something. Lancelot Biggs is a lot of things. He's a genius for one, and he's slightly wacky for another. Also, he's one of the grandest friends a guy ever had, but even his doting mother could not honestly call him good-looking. He's about as tall as an old-fashioned hat rack and built along the same general lines. He's got more bumps and knobs on his gangly frame than a hyperthyroid cucumber. Of these assorted protuberances, the most prominent is an Adam's apple, which bulges from his throat like a half-swallowed egg and jiggles up and down when he's excited like a jitterbug on an inner spring mattress. He was excited now and said VoiceBox was cavorting horribly from north to south and return in nonstop flight. "I can't go now," he repeated starkly. "Not now, of all times, Dad." Hanson shook his head regretfully. "It ain't a case of can or can't, Lancelot. It's a case of got to. There's trouble on Themis again." I said, "Themis? Again? You mean another ship?" "That's right," nodded the skipper. "Attacked and smashed to smithereens. Not a man left alive. Yes." "But that's impossible," I cried. "Only last month, the SSP announced that a peace pact had been signed with the thwart of Themis. The natives of that satellite agreed to join the Solar Union." "Them Themisites," growled the old man, "keep their pledges about as good as them Japanese you read about in the history books. Little yellow squirts the United Nations had to wipe out a couple 100 years ago. This makes the 6th time the thwart has signed a peace pact, and it's the 6th time he's broke it. So, I said, we're elected, eh?" "That's the ticket." Lance Biggs' jaw tightened. He said stiffly, "I'm afraid this is one time I shall not be able to obey orders, sir. I can't go with you." My heart did a flip-flop. I understood and heartily sympathized with Biggs. He wanted to be on Earth right now because, well, like a professional grape farmer, he had reasons of his own. But I knew what his outright refusal meant. The IPC is a hard-boiled corporation. When it issues an order, it expects obedience or else. If Lance refused to make this expedition, he would not only lose his rating and his chance to go up for master's papers, an examination he was planning to take in the very near future, he might also lose his job. Furthermore, and if this sounds selfish, pardon my sullen accent, I hated to think of making a truly dangerous trip without Lieutenant Biggs on the bridge. That brilliant winding had pulled so many bunnies out of the derby, saving our individual and collective necks with such monotonous regularity that we'd be utterly lost without his assistance. But I said nothing. After all, this was a question Biggs must decide for himself. As it turned out, though, it was not I, nor the old man, nor Lancelot who solved the problem. It was Mrs. Biggs. In a calm, decisive voice, she said, "But Lance, dear, such commotion, of course you will go." "What?" blurted Lance. "And leave you? Never!" "Stuff," sniffed Diane, "and nonsense. Stop talking like a cheap play. What earthly good are you doing here? Not a bit. But out there, men have died, betrayed by a race of scoundrels. Brave men, spacemen like yourself. Your duty is plain. You must go. You have no choice." But, protested Lance. "But," interrupted Diane, "nothing. Now, I'm tired. You boys run along. Clean up this little job. I'll be here at home waiting for you." Biggs asked apprehensively, And you'll be all right while we're gone? You're sure?" "Certainly I'll be all right," declared Diane. "Now, lift grav, sailors, and good luck." So we went. It was one hell of a job collecting the Saturn's crew. Some of them were miles away. Several of them were, well, let's be charitable and say unship-shape. And all of them were madder than an Alzarin die at having their leaves canceled. But none of them were foolish enough to refuse the order. So, to make a long story less so, several hours later, the Saturn roared from its mooring cradle, all jets blasting, and we were off to Themis. Well, The planet Saturn is approximately 900 million miles from the Sun, and since it was currently on our side of that central beacon, about 800 million miles from Earth. In the good old days, BB, before Biggs, that would have meant a voyage of weeks, but since our ship was equipped with Lancelot's invention, the VI, or Velocity Intensifier, unit, which enables spacecraft to attain speeds limited only by the critical velocity of light, we could expect to reach our destination in a trifle more than 10 hours. To forestall cracks from Earth-lubber mathematicians who point out that 186,000 times 60 times 60 would give us a cruising speed of almost 700 million miles per hour, let me explain that you have to let the hypotomics warm up for about 5 hours before you can cut in the VI unit. Then the unit has to be switched off at least an hour before you reach your objective so you can decelerate without breaking every bone in your head. Thus, we had a 10-hour trip ahead of us. So, as the Saturn jogged along outward into space, I sat back and tried to remember everything I'd ever heard about Themis. It wasn't much. I knew that in 1905, Pickering, the discoverer of Phoebe, had first spotted Saturn's 10th satellite. He had named this tiny body Themis after the goddess of law and order, which, in view of later events, was a huge and mirthless horse laugh. Then something queer happened. Themis disappeared. Yeah, that's right. It got lost. Can you imagine losing a cosmic body about 300 miles in diameter? Well, that's exactly what the astronomers of the bloody 20th century did. According to their record books, they hunted for it time and time again, but never relocated it. Finally, they decided astronomer Pickering must have been sopping up too much spiritus fermente the night he discovered the satellite, and they expunged its name from the records. Which was, of course, a terrific boner because it was there all the time. It was rediscovered in 1983 by the staff observers of the Goddard Memorial Telescope, located in Copernicus crater on Luna, and in 2031 AD, it was visited, charted, and claimed in the name of the Interplanetary Union by the Space Patrol rocket Orestes on a settlement investigation flight. Only nobody went to live there. For one thing, it was too small pickings to bother with. During the space rush of 2030 to 80, everybody who could beg, borrow, or steal a ride on a ship was hightailing it to the more important planets. Venus, Mars, Mercury, the asteroids. Later, the Jovian satellites became popular. Slowly, the frontiers pushed farther and further out from Sol until now adventurers were willing to take a squint at anybody in space which boasted soil, air, and a modicum of gravity. So, at last, after long years of ignoring them, Earthmen were trying to become palsy-walsy with the Themisites. Oh yes, Themis had natives, humanoid aboriginals not terribly unlike Earth's own children, except that they had 4 legs instead of 2. But our side wasn't getting anywhere and in a rush. As the old man had said, 6 times a patrol party had landed on Themis, and 6 times signed a peace pact with the ruler, or thwart, of the globe. But each time the pact had been ignored by the Themisites as soon as a party of colonists attempted to land. The defenseless cruise ships had been set upon, destroyed, their cargo stolen, and their passengers brutally slaughtered. So now, here we were, blithely barging in where sensible angels might justifiably hesitate to tread. Didn't make sense. I asked the skipper about it. Look, Cap, I demanded, maybe I'm sort of slow on the intake, but how come we draw this assignment? Since the Themisites seem to want trouble, how come the Space Patrol doesn't go busting out there with rotors primed and a couple of battalions to occupy the world? On account, explained Hansen impatiently, Themis is populated by a race with an intelligent quotient of more than 0.7 on the solar constant scale, Sparks, and also because the race has a recognized form of government. According to the interplanetary law, colonization of civilized bodies can only be carried out with the permission of the native inhabitants, and aggressive occupation is forbidden when those inhabitants possess humanoid intelligence. Meaning, I asked, what? We aren't allowed to grab Themis unless the Themisites let us? Meanin', snorted the old man, that if you was the only inhabitant of Themis, the SSP wouldn't have nothing to worry about. But the hell with that. I didn't come here to bandage words with you. I came up to ask you if you happened to notice the funny way Lance is acting. I had. I nodded somberly. Moping around, I acknowledged, like a biddy on a china egg. But you can't expect anything different, Skipper. After all, he didn't want to leave Diane at a time like this. Of course not. Neither did I. But since we had to, we might as well buckle down and get the job taken care of as quickly as possible. Anyway, you're keeping in touch with home, ain't you? Absolutely. Holding an open circuit every minute. But don't worry about Biggs, Skipper. He'll be all right as soon as we actually get to work. That's as far as I got with my Pollyanna glad talk, for at that moment the intercommunicating system rasped to life, and in the reflector appeared the baffled pan of Dick Todd, our second mate. Dick was so nervous he had to lick his lips 3 times before he could grease out a word. At last, Skipper? He managed. Yeah, what is it? Themis? We're pulling into Themis? The old man glanced at his chronometer and nodded. OQ? So we're dropping grabs on schedule. So? Nothing? Gulped Todd, except that Themis has disappeared. The automatic alarm system is going crazy. According to it, there's a large cosmic body right in front of us, but we can't see a thing. I said, uh-oh, and groped for my transmitter key, but before I could start pounding the bug, Hanson grabbed my wrist. And just what do you think you're doing, Sparks? I don't think, I told him. I know. When people see things that aren't there, I know what to do. Hide the bottle. But when they start not seeing things that are there, that's all, folks. I'm calling the SSP base on Luna and asking them to rush a hospital ship out this way immediately, if not sooner. A nice, pretty hospital ship equipped with soft, hem-stitched straitjackets. Don't be a dope, roared the old man. Todd, don't talk nonsense for no good reason. There's something screwy going on around here. I want to know what it is. Come on. And he galloped from my turret like a bolt of goose lightning, hauling me along in his wake by sheer suction. We hightailed it through corridors, up the ramp, and onto the bridge. There we found both Todd and Biggs. Todd was still a delicate shade of bilious green, but he was hunched over the plot table, scribbling hurried calculations. Biggs was in the pilot's bucket seat, punching away at the studs as cheerfully as if this were a routine test flight in home atmo. He glanced around as we came in, and his eyes popped out on stalks. He half rose from his seat. A message, Sparks? He quavered. I shook my head. No word yet, I reassured him. I'll let you know. Meanwhile, what's the trouble around here? Trouble? Repeated Lancelot wonderingly. The old man groaned and pawed at what little remained of his hair. Don't look now, he rasped, but didn't Todd call me a couple minutes ago with some wild and woolly tale about Themis disappearing? Oh, that, smiled Biggs gently. I thought for a second you meant there was something wrong. Why, yes, Dad, Themis has disappeared. Temporarily. Oddest thing. Talk sense, I moaned. Todd said something about there being a large body in our path, too. Did it? I took a look at the central vision plate, which reflected nothing between us and the far stars. Did it go away? Oh, no, drawled Biggs nonchalantly. It's still there. Still there. I looked again, more closely at the vision plate. It was as bare as a debutante's backbone at a ball. What's still where, Lance? Have you gone off your graphs, or are my optics myopic? The large body, said Biggs blandly. It's Themis's moon. It's there, 3 points to starboard and 1 degree to loft. Themis's moon? Croaked the old man. What in Hades are you talking about, Lancelot? Themis is a moon. I know, agreed Biggs, his larynx bobbed pleasantly. That's the curious part of it. This is the first time in the solar system that any satellite has ever been found to have a satellite of its own. But we've located it, charted its trajectory, and cross-checked our calculations, haven't we, Dick?" Todd looked up from the plot table. "That's right," he said hollowly. "Themis has got a moon of its own. An invisible moon." "Invisible moon?" The skipper and I did a twin act. "Yes," said Biggs. I believe that's why Themis, disappears periodically. It is circled by a large opaque satellite with the peculiar property of being able to bend light waves around itself. Consequently, every time the moon revolving around its primary comes between Themis and observers, Themis is occulted and disappears. End of section 25. Section 26 of 12 Stories of Lancelot Biggs by Nelson Bond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Cyndajm. The Ordeal of Lancelot Biggs, Part 2. The old man looked at him like he had just grown a second head. But that's impossible, son," he gasped. "Oh, no," said Lance quietly. "Unlikely, yes, but not impossible because the situation does exist, you see." He clucked thoughtfully. "Strange, isn't it, that we should be the first to find it out after these many years? But that's the laws of chance for you. Every other time a ship visited Themis, the invisible moon must have been on the far side." Hansen was fidgeting like he had wasps in his waistcoat. Now he broke in. "That's all very interesting, but how about the chances of our cracking up on this aforesaid moon of a moon?" "Oh," replied Biggs negligently, "that's all taken care of. We've plotted a new trajectory around it. We should see Themis again in a moment. Ah!" He breathed a sigh of satisfaction. "There she is. Nice-looking little satellite, isn't it?" And true enough, Themis was beginning to appear in the vision plate before us. A weird-looking sight it was. A thin sliver of terrain at first, then widening, growing into a full-sized cosmic body as it stopped being occulted by its phenomenal little companion. Biggs punched the intercommunicating stud and spoke to the engine room. "All right, Mac," he called, "you can cut the VI. Prepare to land in about 50 minutes. Then he turned to us again. "Remarkable thing, what? Someday, when we're not so busy, we'll have to drop jets on that invisible moon, eh? Should be an interesting visit to make." The skipper groaned feebly. "Interesting. He finds an invisible moon, figures a trajectory around it, and then says, let me out of here. I'm feeling heat waves." I grinned at him consolingly. "Cheer up," I told him. "I know just how you feel. Only it's not the heat, it's the humility." So that was that. The next hour was taken up with routine stuff, decelerating to atmo velocity, cruising over Themis until we located the capital city of Kralbur, where the thwart maintained his royal residence, dropping to a stern-jetting landing. That was all child's play for a spaceman like Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs. Thus it was a short while later, armed to the teeth and ready for any eventuality, our foray party of 10 men stood in the lock of the Saturn, listening to Hansen's final instructions. "Be quiet," he advised us. "Be calm. But above all, be careful. These Themisites are as untrustworthy as a three-of-a-kind in a gambling joint. Our orders is to improve relations, not make 'em worse, so act accordingly. We'll treat them exactly like they meet us. If they greet us friendly, we'll be nice. But if they get tough—" "Well?" asked one of the crew. "Give 'em the works," said the old man succinctly, and nodded to his son-in-law. "OQ, Lance? Open up." The airlock wheezed asthmatically, and we stepped out upon the soil of the satellite Themis. A huge mob of natives had gathered around to greet us. They were a weird-looking outfit. Sort of like men on horses, you might say, or like those old centaurs you read about in those mythology books. Maybe that's where the legend of centaurs originated. I don't know. The more man travels the spaceways, the more he discovers races of beings similar to the freaks and curiosities recorded in ancient myths. Lancelot Biggs believes that once upon a time, thousands of years ago, before Earth's old moon crashed, destroying the civilization then existent, man knew the secret of space travel, and legend is a record of things once seen and known. But I wouldn't know about that. I'm just a radio man. Anyhow, these themisites were sort of like us down to the tummy, but from there on, they branched out into the equine family, being endowed with strong, muscular quadrupedal bodies and postscripted with long, bushy tails. But they were intelligent, no doubt about that, and surprisingly enough, they seemed friendly. One, their ruler, trotted forward and raised an arm in the cosmo-wide gesture of greeting. He addressed us in universal, the common language of space. "Salutio, amici," he said. "Welcome to Themis, land of peace and brotherly love." Hansen gasped. "Get a load of that. 3 days ago, the four-legged punks murdered a whole crew of Earthmen, and now they yap about brotherly—" "Maybe he's right," I suggested thoughtfully. "You ever had a brother, Skipper?" "Shh," whispered Biggs. He stepped forward, acting as spokesman for our team. "Greetings, O thwart of Themis. We come as emissaries from the Blue World, seeking to forge a bond of friendship between your people and ours." "Friendship and peace," said the thwart grandiloquently, "are ever the desire of my race." Lance said, "We hear and believe, noble thwart, but evil tidings have lately reached our ears. It is told that a few days ago you led your people in mortal combat against a party from our planet." The thwart drew himself stiffly erect and shook his hand in firm denial. "That," he said in a tone of outraged dignity, "is not so. It was the old thwart who led that brutal assault." "Old thwart? Then you have overthrown his government since?" "The former thwart," informed the Themisite leader, "has been removed from power. I am now thwart of Themis. I wish only friendship and peace between our peoples. And now," his eyes rolled hopefully, "have you brought the usual, tributes?" Tributes, of course, meant graft. Humanoid forms change with the planets, but human nature doesn't. However, we had come prepared, knowing the mentalities of our opponents. Lance beckoned to a pair of our crewmen who lugged forward a crate packed with an assortment of doolollies and thingamajiggers loved by abos like the Themisites. Mirrors, gaudy bits of costume jewelry, brightly colored trinkets, yards of richly hued cloth, horn-rimmed spectacles, cheap cameras, all that sort of thing. Crooked? Sure. Taking advantage of ignorant savages? Absolutely. But hell, you can't interest uncultured aborigines in Van Relsener Atmo converters and pre-Rooseveltian era art treasures. Of course, they'd be glad to get their paws on a few Hammer-Holtz ray pistols or a case of 3-star tackle, but the authorities frown on the practice of supplying lower races with firearms, fireworks, or firewater. So Lance handed out the gadgets to the thwart, who beamed with delight, and after that, the negotiations were a snapperoo. We told what we want: permission for Earth's colonists to settle on Themis, the right to construct spaceports, and so on and so forth. And the ruler said yes, 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 till he sounded like a phonograph needle caught in a worn groove. There remained but one thing to be done: the formal signing of the treaty. So Lance drew from his pocket the previously prepared sheets and was just getting ready to help the thwart scrawl a legal X on the dotted line when a stir passed through the assemblage. It was a nervousness, a jitteriness you could feel. Heads craned upward to look at the sky, hooves pawed restlessly at the turf, and one by one the centaur-like denizens of Themis began drifting away, cantering back toward the cluster of hovels which was their capital city. Even the thwart seemed hesitant, uncertain. For a few minutes he tried to carry on like a bold, brave monarch. Then, with a little whimper that sounded almost like a whinny, he picked up his bundle of loot and galloped away too. Cap Hansen's jaw dropped like a wildcat stalk in a bear market. "Well, I'll be," he choked. "Now what?" But Biggs had been studying the sky. Now he frowned. "Night," he said. "Eh?" "Night," repeated Lance, "or what passes for night on this peculiar little satellite. You see, Themis doesn't revolve on its axis. Therefore, it has no night or daytime, as we on Earth know those periods. And of course, since it travels about its primary so swiftly, and since Saturn itself emits so strong a gagation, occultation by the mother planet doesn't create perfect darkness. But Themis's invisible little companion swings about Themis, and whenever it comes between this world and the sun, a dark period ensues. I should judge we are about to experience one right now. Yes, see, it's beginning to get dark." "You mean," stormed Hansen, "everything's called off on account of darkness? The pact ain't gonna be signed?" "Apparently not," admitted Lance ruefully. "Almost all aboriginal races have a deep dread of darkness, you know. Well," he shrugged, "there's no sense in our waiting out here till the night period ends. We might as well go back in the ship and be comfortable." So we did. Fortunately, the phony night didn't last long. Fortunately for me, I mean, because as soon as we got to the ship, Lance pranced along with me up to the radio turret, and there pestered the living bejabbers out of me to try to get some word from Earth, but that was strictly no-go. My audio was humming like a tenor in a tepid shower. Static galore. But at last the invisible barrier cutting us off from Sol's light slipped away, and once again we marched out onto the soil of Themis. Marched out. This time we sauntered out. We were feeling very carefree and confident, you see, that everything was hunky-dory. Why not? We had been on the verge of signing the new peace pact when darkness interrupted us. That blind, trusting confidence almost cost us our lives. The Themisites were again gathered around our ship, but when we stepped from the airlock, we stepped out into a hail of lethal fury. It was a good break for us that the Themisites had no modern weapons. A couple of Hammerholz pistols in the paws of capable users, or even one 54mm rotor, and yours truly wouldn't be here to chronicle the ensuing events. But the four-legged scoundrels' armaments were fortunately on the barbaric side. Stones and cudgels, crudely forged spears, incompetently carven bows and arrows that were inaccurate as a real estate agent's descriptions, these were the weapons with which we were assailed. Cap Hansen caught a nice-sized chunk of rock amidships, and one of the crewmen had his shoulder opened up by a wobbling spear, but those were our only casualties. Above the hubbub and furor, the Themisites were howling like a mob of unleashed demons. Lance cried, "Back into the ship, quickly!" which was a command requiring no repeat performance. For the next 3 seconds, the airlock port looked like bargain day at the girdle counter. Then we were all inside once more, safe at home but sore as a student equestrian's coccyx. The old man bellowed, "Unlatch the rotors! Treacherous villains, I'll learn 'em to attack Earthmen. We'll blast 'em clean off the face of their nasty, sneaking little globe, the good-for-nothing horses." But Lance said, "No, Dad, please, wait a while." "Wait? What for?" There's something distinctly unusual about this, pondered Lancelot gravely. A few hours ago they were friendly. Now they are screaming for our blood? I don't understand it. But you know my motto, get the theory first. If I can learn why they changed so abruptly... What difference does it make why they changed? They did, didn't they? That's all that counts. No, Dad, the important thing is not to overwhelm the Themicites, beat them into submission. It's to settle our differences for all time, establish an enduring peace. He turned to me. Sparks, get on the wire, will you? I want a complete report from Earth on the previous peace treaties signed with Themis. Who signed them? When? Under what circumstances? Everything we can learn. OQ, I said, it's your business, but my money bets on Skipper's plan. Civilize 'em with a gun is my motto. Biggs shook his ungainly head disapprovingly. That form of reasoning, he declared, died with the dictatorships. Now, get on the key, Sparks, and while you're at it, see if there's any news from Diane, will you? He was a very anxious-looking gent, and no wonder. End of section 26. Section 27 of 12 Stories of Lancelot Biggs by Nelson Bond. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Cyndajm. The Ordeal of Lancelot Biggs. Part 3. Well, after that, Tempest fidgeted, as it has a habit of doing. The static had cleared, and I established contact with Joe Marlowe at Lunar 3. He said he'd try to scare up the info I wanted, but it might take time. I told him to go ahead. I had more time on my hands than a professional watch repairer. So we dillied and dallied, and after a while he came back loaded with more facts than Mr. Britannica put in his encyclopedia. The Themis situation, it seemed, was plenty complex. The first peace pact had been signed 8 months ago between the thwart of Themis and the solar space cruiser Ajax, Colonel A.R. Prentice commanding. Swell! Only 2 weeks later, the Themicites had murdered in cold blood an agent sent there by the Cosmic Corporation to set up a trading post. The SSP had sent a second expedition. This party reported hostile reception. Then, after a whole day wasted in attempting to get in touch with the thwart, the Themicites had suddenly turned friendly and signed a second treaty. This one had lasted exactly 4 days and was busted when the quadrupeds dittoed the craniums of a party of miners who dropped grabs for fresh water supplies. Why go on? Expeditions 3, 4, 5, and 6 had all followed the same pattern. An agreeable understanding followed by a swift kick in the nose. Our experience was no novelty. We were just number 7 on the Themicite hit-and-run parade. In view of the circumstances, Joe Marlowe wound up his report. The authorities here suggest that Captain Hansen get the situation in hand, and get the situation in hand, and get the situation in hand, and get the situation... I cut in on him, but quick. Hold everything, I shot back. Let's play like he now has the situation in hand. What happens next? Let him contact the thwart of Themis, bugged Marlowe, and contact the thwart of Themis, and contact the thwart of Themis, and contact... Biggs was in the turret with me. He can read code almost as well as I can. He stared at me curiously. What's the matter, Sparks? Don't ask me, I retorted. I only work here. Sounds like Marlowe's developed a bad case of digital hiccups. Oh well, we got the information we wanted anyhow. I'll sign off. So I did. Biggs asked, and Diane? No word yet. Joe will let us know. The circuit's still open. Well, you've heard the report. What do you make of it? Biggs said slowly, I don't know, Sparks. It's very peculiar. I'll have to think it over. Yes? What is it? He spoke this last to the wall audio which had come to life. Cap Hansen answered from the bridge. Lance, are you there, son? Listen, come up to the bridge right away, will you? Swift apprehension tightened Biggs's features. What's the matter? The Themicites getting violent? They're not attacking the ship. Hansen groaned like a guest artist at a seance. Just the opposite. Another of them phony nights has passed outside since you two've been fiddling around up there. Now it's daylight again, and there's a mob of Themicites gathered around outside, waving banners and pelting the Saturn with flowers. The thwart just sent a message bidding us friendly welcome to Themis. Great growling gutter snipes, I sputtered. What's this all about? 1 minute they want to kill and boo, and the next they want to bill and coo. Why don't they make up their minds? Probably, decided the skipper, because they ain't got none. Lance, we can't learn anything, said Biggs quietly, in here. Let's go outside. So, for the third time in as many Thesmian days, out we pranced, to be greeted by such hurrah and ballyhoo as you never saw. Those same centaurs who, a few short earthly hours ago, had been aiming lethal presents at our kissers, were now aiming kisses at our presents. Their leader pranced forward gracefully and made a low bow before Cap Hansen. Greetings, O child of the blue world, he intoned. As thwart of Themis, I bid you welcome to our peace-loving little planet. Thanks, said the old man and looked bewildered. Lance, son, suppose you... But Lance was staring curiously at the speaker. He nudged me and whispered, Sparks, study the thwart. Do you notice anything, strange about him? Sure, I assented. He looks like a veterinarian's mistake. Is that what you mean? If it's the color of his eyes you're worrying about, you better ask somebody else. These Themicites all look the same to me, like peas from the same pot. That's not what I meant, whispered Biggs. What strikes me as being odd is that, remember how proud he was of those ornaments we gave him before the night period set in? He had himself all decked out like a Christmas tree. But now look at him. Not a single decoration. Maybe, I suggested, he's allergic to tin? And on the other hand, mused Biggs, that Themicite over there is wearing a bracelet and a brass curtain rod in his nose. He was perfectly right. The big boss of Themis was as barren of trinkets as a pilgrim father. But standing in the background was one of his henchmen, glittering like gilt on a joy joint bar. That was wacky. The thwart didn't look to me like the kind of guy, or hoss, who would donate his tribute to a subject. There's something fishy about this, I said. Ask him how come, Lance, just for the halibut. I will, said Biggs, and stepped forward to do so. But before he could pop the question, the thwart spoke up. Peace, he said hoarsely. No pun intended, pals. Lay down them bricks. Peace between your people and mine, and now, did you bring the usual tribute? Usual tribute, repeated the old man starkly. Of course we did. We give it to you yesterday, you rascally old scoundrel. What's the big idea of... The thwart's eyes darkened and he pawed the ground fretfully. That is a mistake, Earthman. You gave me nothing. What? A whole darn case full of... You gave me, repeated the thwart with increasing ominousness, nothing. You offered a few baubles to the old thwart, possibly. Cap Hansen groaned and turned agonized eyes to his son-in-law. Ain't that something now? Another revolution? Now we gotta pay off twice? Lance nodded soberly. I suspected something like that. Yes, I'm afraid we must, Dad. Tompkins? Splicer? He called two of the crew, so we had to do it again. Go through the same old rigmarole. I'll spare you the details this time, since they were the same as before. We donated, the thwart accepted, and we started talking peace terms. The pact was presented. The thwart studied it, and this time, fortunately, succeeded in stamping it with his official OQ before Themis's invisible moon brought night again. So at last our job was accomplished, and we entered the ship. Cap Hansen was jubilant. "Thank goodness that's done," he sighed happily. "And now, back to Earth and Diane." Biggs's Adam's apple bobbled convulsively in his lean throat. I think we better wait just a little while longer, Dad," he said mildly. "Wait? What for? We got the peace pact signed." "I know, but don't forget that's only the 8th in a long series of such peace pacts. We better stick around a little while and see if they live up to it." "Stick around a while? How long?" Lance glanced through the quartzite viewplanes and said, "Not long, because see, it's night again." "Night? What's night got to do with it?" "That," said Lance seriously, "is just what I want to know. If I could only get the theory straight in my mind, I might have the answer. Sparks," he turned to me, "turn on the tele-audio. Let's see if we can get some word." So I did, but there was nothing cooking. The circuit was as cold as a divorcee's kiss. And that was bad because Biggs was growing nervouser and nervouser by the minute. He wanted to get back to Earth so bad he could taste it. But that's Biggs for you. Thorough and painstaking if he undertakes a thing. And he wasn't going to leave Themis until he knew this situation was completely cleared up. But at last the darkness outside began to lift, and Cap Hansen fidgeted. "Well, here's what you were waiting for, boy. Now what?" "Now," said Biggs, "we see what happens. Are they coming back from their city?" They were. The Themisites were galloping across the plains toward the Saturn again. They were the romping, roamingest bunch of mavericks I ever saw. "Yup," I said. And their attitude?" "Friendly, of course," snorted the skipper. "Why shouldn't they be? Didn't we just sign a peace treaty with them? Lance, I don't know what's ailing you. He never finished his denunciation of Biggs, for at that moment the oncoming Themisites hove within hurling distance and started hurling. Only this time it was not, as it had been a short while before, flowers. This time their expressions of everlasting peace and affection were offered with stones, arrows, and spears. Well, Hansen's roar of rage threatened to lift the top clean off the control turret. "Dastards!" he screamed. "Vandals! Murderers! And things that rhyme with what I first called them! This is all I'm going to take from them four-legged scoundrels. Call up the men, Sparks. Tell them to man the guns. We're going to blast them murdering skunks from here to kingdom come." "Wait, Dad," pleaded Biggs feverishly. "I think I'm beginning to understand, faintly. If you'll just give me a little more time." "Time, your Aunt Nellie. I've done all the delaying I'm going to." It was at that moment the tele-audio, which I had set to voice code any messages which came in on the Luna circuit, began squawking. It was faint at first and sort of garbled, with lots of static, but it cleared as it went along. "Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs," it called, "aboard the Saturn. Congratulations. You are the father of a fine baby boy." "Boy?" gasped Biggs. His face turned every color in the spectrum and a couple that haven't been invented yet. A boy?" "Yippee!" howled the old man, his thoughts of vengeance on the Themisites temporarily forgotten. "A grandson! I'm a grandpa! Yippee!" "Congratulations, Lance," I said. "A boy? Oh, swell! Another Biggs in space, one of these days." "See if you can get Earth, Sparks," chattered Biggs. "Find out how Diane is." "Right," I snapped. "I'll get at it immediately." I started for the radio room, but before I had taken 2 steps, the audio began talking again. "Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs," it called, "aboard the Saturn. Congratulations. You're the father of a fine baby boy." My face sort of blanched. I turned to Biggs. "Congratulations," I offered. "Again, Lance." "Golly, 2 boys?" Hansen demanded. "What do you mean 2 boys? That's a repeat message, you dope." Lance smiled sort of feebly. I I'm afraid not, Dad, he said. If it were a repeat message, Marla would have said, repeat. Sparks is right. I'm the father of twins. Well, I'll be darned, ejaculated the old man, then rallying. Twins, eh? Good, that makes me 2 grandpas. Fine, I'm twice as glad. He stopped, his jaw dropping strickenly, for again Joe Marlowe's voice was rolling through the control turret. Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs, it called, aboard the Saturn. Congratulations. You are the father of a fine baby boy. Good gracious, gasped Biggs and fell into a chair. Triplets? This time I addressed myself to Hansen. Congratulations, Skipper, I said. Now you're 3 grandpas. If Diane keeps this up, you'll be able to man a whole cruiser. The old man's face was fiery. Now, hold everything, he stormed. This is going too far. Diane didn't have to overdo it just because we're not there. There's such a thing as triplets? I won't allow it. What's the matter? I grinned at him. Afraid of the 3 little Biggs, Skipper? Don't be a big bad wolf. But even I didn't think it was funny when at that moment Joe Marlowe's familiar tones rolled through the room again. Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs, he called, aboard the Saturn. Congratulations. You are the father of a fine baby boy. Gosh, I gulped. This is turning into a parade. Cap Hansen's face was a study in Technicolor. His jowls were dangling to his 3rd waistcoat button. But oddly enough, at this 3rd dire pronouncement, Lancelot Biggs did not even wince. Instead, his eyes brightened. He rose from the chair into which a moment before he had tumbled. No, he yelled, not a parade, a solution. Huh? I gaped at him. Solution to what? The unemployment problem? No. Sparks to all our troubles. Quadruplets? No. Triplets? No. Twins? No. Not even that. Just 1 baby. You mean, I asked him, that's a repeat message? But Lance, you know as well as I do, Joe would have announced it as a repeat. Certainly, but what we're hearing is the same message over and over again. Huh? Hansen forced the query, new hope in every wrinkle of his brow. Yes, remember how Marlowe's orders got grooved before, Sparks? Well, this is some more of the same thing. I know why, too. And I also know why we've been having so much trouble with the themosites. You do? Why? The moon. The invisible moon. That's the answer. Tell me, Sparks, what sort of things are invisible? Why, I stammered, dark things seen against a dark background? Light things seen against a light background. Objects marked with protective coloration. And transparent things, chortled Biggs. Transparent things with just sufficient mass to cause refraction of light. That's what Themis's moon is made of. Pure, unadulterated galena in its natural form is a colorless, transparent substance, sufficiently opaque to occult Themis, but also with enough mass to refract normal light rays. And galena is... I get it, I hollered, a natural wave trap for radio transmissions. Back in the early days of the 20th century, galena was a substance used in the manufacture of experimental so-called crystal sets. By golly, you're right, Lance. That satellite is large enough to capture and retain a record of Joe Marlowe's voice, and as it revolves, it keeps retransmitting it to us over and over again. Lieutenant Lancelot Biggs, repeated the voice of Marlowe, aboard the Saturn. Congratulations. You're the father of a fine baby boy. Like that, said Biggs. Yes. Notice how Joe's voice always catches a little just before he says congratulations? It's been the same fault every time. Oh, Q, broke in the old man. Maybe you're right. You usually are. But what's that got to do with the way the themosites keep changing their attitude toward us? Don't tell me they got galena in their veins. Biggs shook his head firmly. No, that's another question entirely, but it can be solved by the same theory. Huh? Twins, said Biggs, or rather multiple rulers. Sparks, you said you couldn't tell the difference between one themyscite and another. That's right. Neither can I. Neither can any Earthman. That's why we've been unable to understand their psychology and, more important still, their form of government. Government? Burst in the old man. Now he talks about government? What's that got to do with? Why, explained Lancelot, everything. The themyscites have one of the rarest forms of self-rule known, but one which early in the Greek civilization had its counterpart on Earth. You see, they are an omnigarchy. Who-no-witchy? I choked. Omnigarchy. From the Latin base omni, meaning all. You see, on this world, everyone takes his turn at being thwart. Every day, a new themyscite becomes master over his brethren until the next night period. That is why the thwart we signed our pact with today denied having received any gifts. He told the truth. We had given our tributes to the thwart of the preceding day. That must be also why peace pacts have been broken with such regularity. Each succeeding thwart feels he, now being the ruler, is entitled to a share of the spoils that go with the signing of the treaty, and being not obligated to uphold the signature of a deposed thwart leads a movement against the colonists in an effort to win his rights. The individual natures of these thwarts dictates the form of movement. If the thwart is a naturally peace-loving creature, he comes with soft words and flowers. If he's a brutal type, he attempts to take his tribute by force. I demanded wildly, but how the dickens are we ever going to form a permanent treaty with a race that changes rulers once a day? Especially when the Themisian day is only a couple of Earth hours. Biggs shrugged. That, he declaimed, is not our problem, but that of the Interplanetary Union. My private opinion is that since Themis has a limited population, the best way to assure peace would be to buy over every single themyscite. Of course, that means a terrific initial expenditure, but, said the old man, we've done what we was sent here for. We signed a peace pact, which ain't worth the paper it's printed on, and we found out why all the former treaties was failures. So, if you ask me, the best thing we can do is get out of here before one of them periodic thwars, smarter than the rest, discovers a way to wreck our ship. What say, son? That, nodded Biggs, would be my idea too. Our task is finished. We'll leave it to the Space Patrol to figure out the rest. Come on, Dad, let's lift Gravs for home and Lancelot Jr. The old man frowned. Oh, no more silly names like that in our family. That young man's name is going to be Vladimir, after me. Lancelot, said Lancelot stubbornly. Vladimir, said Vladimir Hansen the same way. Lancelot, Vladimir. So we all went home and met Christopher Biggs. Only trouble with those two shipmates of mine is that they forgot Diane Hansen, who, being the daughter of Vladimir and the wife of Lancelot, has a stubborn streak of her own. Kit Biggs weighed 7 pounds and 8 ounces. He and his mother are both doing fine, thanks. Biggs is doing OQ too. He's got a new title now. Around his home, that is. He's first mate in charge of the 3-cornered pants department. But what do you expect? After all, life is just one damp thing after another. The end. End of section 27. End of 12 Stories of Lancelot Biggs by Nelson Bond.